At 6 o'clock in the morning, my own son was supposed to open the door and say the most terrible words of my life. But I heard them earlier, standing in the dark at his doorstep, holding the hot soup I had prepared for him. "Mom, you don't need to come here anymore. You're only getting in our way." I heard those words through a closed door. From my son. From the child I once saved from death. The child for whom I sold my jewelry. For whom I worked to the point of exhaustion. For whom I ate nothing but bread and peanut butter for 3 months straight, just so he would always have a proper meal on the table. But on that cold January morning, standing at his door with trembling hands and a thermos of hot chicken soup, I realized for the very first time in my life, I had raised a son who no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me only as an old woman who stood between him and what he wanted. Money, houses, an inheritance, and perhaps even my death. My name is Helen. I am 79 years old. And until that morning, I believed that a mother's love could endure anything. I was wrong. Because sometimes the most painful betrayal doesn't come when you are abandoned. It comes when the person you loved more than your own life calmly watches you fade away. The alarm rang at exactly 3 a.m. I opened my eyes in the dark room and just lay still for a few seconds. Lately, it took me longer and longer to remember where I was. My body had grown weak, my joints ached, my back hurt every morning. But on that day, I didn't even feel the fatigue. Because I knew. Today, I would see Daniel again. My son. I carefully reached for the alarm clock. My fingers trembled as I turned off the sound. Once, these hands could work 12 hours straight. Once, they held a little boy who cried in the night from pain. Now, they could barely manage a simple cup. I sat up on the bed and looked at the photograph by my nightstand. It was Daniel. He was 10 years old. He stood next to me, smiling, holding a cheap gift he had bought me with his pocket money. "Mom, I will always take care of you," he had said back then. I remembered those words my whole life. And that was exactly why I kept believing him, even when he had long ceased to be that little boy. I slowly got up, took my cane, and went into the kitchen. On the table lay a chicken, fresh vegetables, herbs. I had bought it all yesterday. It was more expensive than usual, but I wanted to cook something special for him. Daniel had looked so tired lately, at least that is how it seemed to me. He said he was working a lot, that he was stressed, that things were hard. And I did what I had always done my entire life. I forgot about myself, and I thought only of him. I put the pot on the stove. While the soup slowly simmered, I looked through the glass lid at the boiling broth and remembered the past. After my husband died, I was left alone with a young child. I was only 40 years old. I had no big savings, no support. I had only one goal, to give my son a better life than mine. I worked at the factory during the day. At night, I sewed clothes for the neighbors. Sometimes I returned home at 2 in the morning, and at 6, I was already up again. There were days when I collapsed from exhaustion, but when Daniel opened the door and said, "Mom, I got an A," I forgot about everything. When he got into university, I cried all evening. I thought, now my life has meaning. I never dreamed of wealth. I didn't need a big house. I didn't need expensive things. I wanted only one thing. For my son to occasionally ask, "Mom, have you eaten?" But with each passing year, that question was asked less and less, until one day it vanished completely. At 4:50 a.m. the soup was ready. I carefully poured it into the thermos. I checked the lid several times. I was terrified it would get cold. It was freezing outside. I put on my old coat, took my cane, and went out. Daniel's house was about a 20-minute walk away, but my age made those 20 minutes feel like almost an hour. Every step echoed with pain. My left leg hurt more than usual, but I kept walking, because I was thinking of his face. I imagined him opening the door. How surprised he would be. How he would say, "Mom, did you make my favorite soup again?" I even smiled. How foolish. Now I understand. I was smiling at a person who had stopped smiling at me a long time ago. At 5:40 a.m., I stood in front of his door. I raised my hand. I was about to press the doorbell, but then I heard the voice of Chloe, my daughter-in-law. "Is she here again?" I froze. "Yes," Daniel replied. My heart sank. I waited for him to say, "That's my mother. Speak with respect." But he remained silent. "Honestly, Daniel, I don't understand why you let her behave like this." "What is she doing?" "She comes here constantly. looking at us as if we owe her something. I slowly lowered my hand. Chloe, no, listen to me. Your mother is old. She needs to understand her place. My breath caught in my throat, but the most terrible part was yet to come. By the way, Chloe said, have you talked to her about the houses yet? There was a pause. Not yet. Why? I don't know. Daniel, she is almost 80. Her voice grew quieter. How much longer is she going to own them? I felt a coldness inside, not from the winter air, but from fear. She is your mother, Chloe said, but those houses should belong to you. And then my son replied, I know. 2 short seconds, 2 words. But they destroyed every memory of the boy I had once raised. I stood behind the door. The soup in my hands was growing cold, and my son, inside his warm house, was discussing my future, without me. As if I weren't even there. As if I weren't his mother. But just an old woman who was in the way of his inheritance. I clutched the thermos tightly to my chest, turned around, and walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Because sometimes the pain is so deep that there are no tears left. Only one feeling remains. Understanding. The person you protected your whole life can become the person you have to protect yourself from. I don't remember how long it took me to walk back home. Maybe 40 minutes. Maybe an hour. At that moment, time ceased to matter. Each step was heavier than the last. But the heaviest part was not the pain in my legs, not the cold wind biting through my old coat, not my age. It was the sudden, hollow emptiness inside me. My whole life, I had feared only one day. The day my son would no longer need me. But I never thought that day would come like this. I thought that one day Daniel would simply become too busy. That he would have his own family. His own work. His own problems. I was prepared for him to call less often. I was prepared for us not to see each other every week. But I could never have imagined that he would stand behind a closed door and calmly listen to his wife call me a burden. And the most terrifying part, he wasn't just listening. He was agreeing. When I entered my apartment, the first thing I did was put the kettle on. It was strange. After such a shock, most people would lie down on the bed and weep. But I was always a person who kept moving, even when everything inside me was falling apart. I took off my coat, placed my cane against the wall, and looked at the thermos I was holding. I had brought it back. Full. I couldn't leave it there. Somehow, it hurt too much to think of someone throwing that soup into the trash. I opened the lid. The smell of chicken broth filled the kitchen once again. And suddenly I remembered little Daniel. He was 5 years old. He sat at the kitchen table holding a spoon with both hands. Mom, your soup is the best in the world. I smiled through my tears. Even better than in a restaurant? He nodded seriously. Yes, because you make it. Back then, I believed that a child's love for their mother never fades. I was wrong. The phone rang. I startled. The screen showed the name, Daniel. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. Before, I had always answered immediately, even if I was busy, even if I felt unwell, even if I woke up in the middle of the night. But now, for the first time, I asked myself, why? Why was the person who had just allowed me to be humiliated calling me? I picked up the receiver anyway. Hello? Mom? His voice was normal, calm, as if nothing had happened, as if 20 minutes ago he hadn't been discussing behind my back when he would get his hands on my houses. Did you come by this morning? I remained silent. I saw the footprints near the door. I closed my eyes. Yes. Mom, I told you not to come so early. His voice was soft, but now I heard what I had never noticed before, the insincerity. I just wanted to do something nice for you. I know. A pause, but Chloe doesn't handle that kind of food well. How quickly he found an excuse. Not, Mom, thank you. Not, I'm sorry. Only Chloe. Always Chloe. All right, I said quietly. Mom, don't be upset. He said it as if the problem lay with me. Just understand we're going through a difficult period right now. I looked out the window at the street at the people rushing about their business. Everyone was living their lives. And I was standing in my kitchen, talking to the person to whom I had given mine. Of course, Daniel. Good. Relief washed over his voice, and then his tone shifted abruptly. By the way, I felt it immediately. This was the real reason for the call. Not the soup, not my health, not me. Yes, I wanted to ask you something. What is it? About your neighborhood. I froze. My neighborhood? Yes. They say there's a redevelopment plan coming up soon. I slowly sat down on a chair. There it was. This was exactly why he called. Who told you that? There was a short pause, only a few seconds, but it was enough for me. Oh, just some colleagues were discussing it. A lie. I knew him. I had known him since birth. Whenever he was nervous, he always paused briefly before answering. And why do you ask? Just curious. He was speaking too fast. If the redevelopment happens, your houses could skyrocket in value. I said nothing. Mom, you do realize that these things are too complicated to handle on your own? And that was when I heard the real Daniel. Not my son, not my child, but a man who was already mentally spending my money. I can help you with it. Help me? Of course. He grew animated. I know some people in real estate. I can arrange for you to get the absolute best price. I looked at my hands. These old hands, they had built his future. And now he wanted to take the fruits of my labor. I will think about it. Mom, you don't need to think about it. For the first time, irritation crept into his voice. You're not young anymore. I felt something tighten in my chest. What are you trying to say? I'm just saying it's too hard for you to manage these things. A pause. Trust me. Trust me. That word cut deeper than anything else, because I had trusted him my entire life. And that very trust was what he was trying to exploit. All right, Daniel. Really? He immediately cheered up. Yes, great, I'll stop by in a few days then. Why? To go over the paperwork. Paperwork. Not my health. Not how I was feeling. Not why I had walked away in tears that morning. Paperwork. We will see, I said. And for the first time in my life, I did not tell my son the truth. I didn't say I heard you this morning. I didn't say you hurt me. I didn't say you broke my heart. I simply hung up. That evening, I sat alone in my living room for a long time. In front of me lay old photographs. In one, there was little Daniel. In another, my husband. In a third, our family. I picked up the photo of my son and looked at it for a long time. When did you change? I whispered. But there was no answer. Because sometimes a person changes so slowly that you only notice when it is already too late. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I startled. On the threshold stood my old neighbor, Dr. Arthur. He was around 70. He had worked as a doctor for many years and was one of the very few people who genuinely cared about how I was doing. Helen? He looked closely at my face. What happened? I tried to smile. Nothing. But he knew me too well. Helen, I saw you this morning. I turned away. In the park, my heart skipped a beat. You saw me? He nodded. You were sitting on a bench, crying. I remained silent. What did Daniel do? His question made me look up. Why do you immediately think of him? Arthur sighed heavily. Because your whole life, you've only ever talked about him. He walked in and sat opposite me. Helen, have you ever considered what happens when the person you sacrificed everything for becomes the person who causes you the most pain? I lowered my eyes. And for the first time in years, I spoke the truth. I think it has already happened. Arthur was silent. And then he asked, what happened? And I told him everything. About the door, about Chloe, about the conversation, about the houses, about the paperwork. When I finished, a long silence filled the room. Finally, Arthur spoke. Helen, yes? You must be careful. I frowned. Why? He looked straight into my eyes, because when people start treating someone else's property as their own, they can become capable of anything. I wanted to say he was exaggerating. I wanted to defend my son, out of habit. But I couldn't, because deep down inside I already knew. Arthur was right. And the most terrifying part of this story wasn't that my son wanted my houses. It was that, for the very first time, I had become afraid of my own child. The next day, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in many years, I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to call Daniel. I didn't want to ask how he was doing. This feeling was unfamiliar. I had spent my whole life waking up with one thought. What can I do for my son? But that morning, a different thought appeared. What must I do for myself? I slowly walked over to the mirror. An elderly woman stood before me. Gray hair, tired eyes, wrinkles that told the story of my entire life. But behind those wrinkles, it was still me. The woman who had survived her husband's death, who had raised a child alone, who had never broken when things were hard. And suddenly, I realized I had forgotten about myself for far too long. After Arthur left, I pulled an old metal box out of the closet. Inside lay documents, letters, photographs, and most importantly, the deeds to my houses. 5 small old houses in the neighborhood where I had lived for nearly 40 years. To other people, they were just old buildings. To me, they were my entire life. My husband and I had bought them gradually. One house, then a second. We saved every single dollar. We were never rich, but we knew how to dream. When my husband died, these houses became my shield. My guarantee that in my old age I would never have to depend on anyone, not even my own son. I ran my hand over the papers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no love, only fear. Because now I understood. Daniel wasn't just interested in my life. He was interested in what would remain after it. That same day, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Robert Fisher. An old friend of my late husband. He was a lawyer. Once, he had helped our family. But after my husband passed, we had gradually lost touch. Helen? His voice changed when he heard me. Is it really you? Yes, Robert. There was a brief pause on the other end. How are you? I looked at the documents spread before me. I need your help. 2 hours later, I was sitting in his office. He listened to my story attentively. He did not interrupt. He did not ask pointless questions. When I finished, he took off his glasses and sighed deeply. Helen, yes? Do you realize that if you hadn't overheard that conversation by chance, you might have signed whatever he put in front of you? I nodded. I know. Robert opened a folder. Then we must act. He explained everything to me. How to protect my assets, how to revoke any old powers of attorney, and most importantly, how to place all 5 houses into an irrevocable trust. Once we set up this trust, Robert explained, you will retain the right to live in your home and receive the rental income, but the properties themselves will be legally locked. No one, not even you, under pressure, will be able to sell or transfer them without the strict approval of an independent trustee. It completely takes the target off your back. And one more thing, Robert added, looking at me seriously. What? Do not let Daniel know that you are onto him. I was surprised. Why? Because right now, he thinks he is in control. Let him show his true colors. And so I decided to wait. But I didn't just wait. I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. I set up a small discreet camera on the bookshelf in my living room. Not for revenge, not for spite, but because I needed to protect myself. A few days later, Daniel visited. I barely recognized him. He brought flowers. My favorites, the ones he hadn't bought me in years. Mom, how are you feeling? He was smiling. Too perfectly. Better, sweetheart. He sat down beside me. He took my hand, and for a split second, I saw that little boy from the past. The young Daniel. And it hurt. Because deep down, a tiny part of me was still hoping he would say, Mom, I'm so sorry. But instead he said, I wanted to talk to you about the houses. Of course, I almost smiled. What about them? I think it would be much easier for you if I took over the management. In what way? A sale, he said quickly. Mom, you deserve a peaceful retirement. It's better to invest the capital. I know of a very solid project. And what if I don't want to sell? He paused. Only for a second. But I saw it. The flash of irritation. Mom, he forced another smile. You just don't understand how difficult it is to manage these things nowadays. There it was. Not care. Not love. Control. I quietly said, all right. His eyes lit up. Really? Yes, he smiled broadly. I knew you'd understand. But he didn't know the truth. I said, all right, not because I was surrendering, but because I was letting him walk right into the boundary I had set. A week later, the trap snapped shut. Daniel arrived in the morning. This time he wasn't alone. He brought a man with him. Mom, this is a legal advisor I know. I looked at the stranger. What is this for? Just some standard paperwork to get things started. My heart squeezed. I realized he was moving fast. Far too fast. I offered them a calm smile. Of course. They sat down at the table. The man laid out the documents. Miss Helen, this is a standard procedure. It transfers the management authority to your son. I picked up the papers. I looked through them. And there it was. A full transfer of property control, leaving me with nothing. I looked up, looking past the stranger, straight at my son. Daniel. Yes, Mom? Did you really think I would sign this? He froze. His expression shifted. What? I reached beside my chair and pulled out a blue folder, laying it flat on the table. Inside were the newly minted trust agreements, certified by Robert. Beside the folder, I placed my phone, queuing up the recording of his conversation with Chloe. I stood at your door last week, Daniel. I heard every word. The silence in the room became absolute. I heard everything, I repeated. Daniel took a step back. His face went entirely pale. Mom, you took it the wrong way. I shook my head. No, Daniel. My voice was steady and quiet. I understood it perfectly. The hardest part wasn't exposing him. The hardest part was looking at the man I had given birth to and accepting that the child I loved was gone. Why? I asked, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Why did you do this? He kept his head down, silent. Then he whispered, I had debts. What kind? Bad investments I owed people. I closed my eyes, and for the sake of money, you decided to swindle your own mother? I didn't want to hurt you. He began to cry. For the first time in years, I saw my son weep, but those tears could not mend the past. Because some things, once broken, can never be put back together. With the irrevocable trust fully active, the houses were completely safe, far out of Daniel's reach. When he and his associate realized there was absolutely nothing they could legally do, they left. Chloe tried to call me later, screaming and demanding answers, but I simply blocked her number. They had no legal ground to stand on, and they knew it. A few months later, I decided to sell 2 of the smaller houses, but not the way Daniel had envisioned. With Robert's help, I used the proceeds to establish a local charity fund for vulnerable elderly citizens. I named it the Second Chance, because I knew firsthand that many seniors go through the exact same silent torment. They stay quiet. They endure. They are too ashamed to admit that their own children are hurting them. I wanted them to know that they have every right to stand up and protect themselves. One evening, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring for a long time, but finally I answered. Mom. His voice was hushed, weak. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I said nothing. But I just wanted to say... He stopped, taking a shaky breath. I'm sorry. One word. The word I had waited to hear for so long, but now it arrived too late to change anything. Daniel, I said. Yes? I will always be your mother. I heard him sob on the other end. But I will never let you destroy my life again. There was a long silence. Then he whispered, I understand. I hung up, and for the first time in a very long time, a deep sense of peace washed over me. I am 79 years old now. I still walk with a cane. I still climb the stairs slowly. And yes, sometimes I still feel the weight of loneliness. But now I know a very important truth. Age does not make a person powerless. Having a kind heart does not mean you must allow others to walk all over you. And loving your children should never mean giving up the love and respect you owe to yourself. That night, when my alarm rang once more at 3 a.m., I did not get up to cook soup for my son. I stayed in my warm bed, closed my eyes, and slept peacefully until the sun came up. And when I finally woke to make breakfast for myself, I smiled.